Hey Refuge Church, I'm so excited to be with you guys again today, talking through the story of the book of Exodus or Shemot. We're in the middle of this conversation, though we're wrapping it up this week, between Moshe and God about Moshe's calling and all of his objections to his calling. So let's pray and jump in. God, I thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about you and your story and who we are and our calling in this world. I thank you that you have given that to us. I thank you that you are here with us, and I ask that your Spirit would be ministering to us and working with us as we listen, as we attend to this practice, this weekly practice of coming back to the text. Be with our minds to help us stay focused and rooted in you, and be in our hearts that they might be open to hearing what it is that you might have for us this week. All right, so like I said, going all the way back to chapter 3, Moshe was walking in the desert. In the backside of the desert, he comes upon this bush that's on fire, and it starts talking to him. He's called to go save this immigrant community. And he has a lot of problems with that, but he's starting to get more in the zone now. So let's jump in and see what he's saying. It's verse 10 of chapter 4. Moshe said to God, "Please, God, I'm not a man of words, not yesterday, not in 3 days, and not since you spoke to your worker, for I have a heavy mouth and a heavy tongue." So a lot has been made about that last section. Rightfully, most people think that Moshe probably had a stutter, which apparently can feel, though I'm not someone who has that particular challenge, but it feels like a heavy weight can be in your mouth that's holding back all the words that you're trying to say. And so that could be, or it could be some other neurological condition or some other disability that could be affecting Moshe, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But I want to not jump over the juicy stuff in the rest of the verse. So going back a second, he says, "Your worker," or "your servant." It's often translated, which is fine. But that's a big deal, right? Because before he's been saying, "I couldn't possibly do this. I don't even know who you are. I don't even know what your name is. How is it possible that you would pick me?" And now he's shifted to saying, okay, identity-wise, I might be up to this. And I still have objections, like we see right here, but yet I'm starting to see myself as your worker. So how often do we do the same thing, right? How often do we say, look, I'm a Christian, I'm someone who follows Jesus, but I still have all these objections for God, and I would like to be able to stay within my comfort zone. God might tell you in the moment via your conscience or the Holy Spirit, or however you frame that, people are talking pretty bad about my coworker over there. I should probably go stick up for him, or I should probably go try to peacekeep in that situation, or I should interrupt in some other way, or I should go check out how my coworker's doing. Any of the above. And we often have so many objections, and we have that cognitive dissonance of, I know what the right thing to do is, but it would be better for me in my own mental calculus if I don't do that. And we come up with all sorts of excuses. This week, I would like to challenge us to be aware of when we're pushing up against something, when we feel the gentle nudge telling us, hey, maybe you shouldn't tell that story, or hey, maybe this is an opportunity to love this person, or reach out and check in on this person. And when we sense that objection, oh, but I shouldn't do that because X, to recognize that that's what's happening, because we're missing out on glorious opportunity to lean into our calling, and lean into what it means to be a follower of God, lean into the opportunity to display the character of God and advance kingdom and bring more shalom to the world, right? When we have our objections, we are stealing our own joy, much less the joy of the people around us, right? So let's be aware of that this week. But the heart of his objection here, let's look at it. He says, I'm not a man of words, which is an identity thing, right? Not yesterday, not in 3 days, and not since you spoke to me. Often that gets translated away just to say, I'm not eloquent, or I've never been a good speaker. But he says specifically at the end there, not since you last spoke to me, or not since you started speaking to me. And I think that's significant because so many of us enter our faith journey or our spiritual journey, whether that's post-baptism, expecting to go into this new world and this as a new person, which we get from some lovely verses from Paul of I'm a new person now, right? And I have the Spirit, and so I will be fundamentally changed, and I have these new abilities, and so I will stroll through life perfectly equipped to do everything that I'm supposed to be doing. You are perfectly equipped to do everything that you're supposed to be doing. Paul also says that. However, it's you as you are right now, with all of your flaws and all of your weaknesses and all of your struggles. You already have everything that you need to do the right thing today and in your life. And sometimes we try to wait for when the stars feel aligned for us to go out and do the right thing. And okay, now it makes sense. I finished therapy. I've figured out how to think about my trauma. I've checked all these boxes. I now drink 60 ounces of water a day. Now I'm ready. That time will never come, right? Because we're always putting the milestone out further and further and further for ourselves, right? Moshe says, maybe when you start speaking to me, you magically transform me into a great orator, but that hasn't happened. That's not the way that God works with us, which we'll see in a minute again. So please know that you are already perfectly equipped to do the work that you need to do. All right, but back to this heavy mouth and heavy tongue. God replies to Moshe, who placed a mouth on humans? Who appointed the silent or the deaf or the seeing or the blind? Is it not I, God? This is a huge deal. This is where we get our doctrine of disability from, not our doctrine of suffering, not our doctrine of disease. Let's not conflate all of those. That's rude. The whole of disability experience is not just one of suffering. Let's think complexly here. But it's huge when we do think about disability. Who placed a mouth on humans or humanity? Who appointed the silent or the deaf or the seeing or the blind? I love that he throws seeing in there because it's leveling the field, just as he chose to appoint one person as someone who is able to see. He also appointed someone who is not able to see. And that is not the entirety of who they are, right? He doesn't come to Moshe and say, hey, person with a disability, I am choosing you because of your disability. It's a part of who Moshe is. And it's too bad that the Prince of Egypt didn't work that in, even though I love that film. It's not the entirety of who Moshe is, and yet it's a big part of his life. But his mission doesn't revolve around it. So often the message that is told to disabled people is you exist to be inspiration porn for other people. That's also extremely rude, centering ourselves at the center of the disabled person's experience, and saying, oh, you've had such a horrible thing happen to you. Also rude. And yet what you're still able to do is so inspiring and helpful to me, an abled person. Let's stop doing that and expand our horizons of what disabled people are able to do in their communities in the world, because they're just as able to do all of those things, even though they have challenges, as you or I in their own unique way, which is wonderful. If we are also tempted to think about disability as something that was a mistake, especially if someone's not born with a disability, as something that happened to you and you're being overlooked by God. Nope, it's an appointment. He made no mistake. You are appointed to be a person in this world who is also deaf. And he chose that for a reason, and that reason is not the fundamental reason for your existence, but it is just a part of you and a part of your identity. And that's wonderful. In John 5, we see Jesus talking to a man who is disabled, who has limited mobility. And he asks that man if he wants to be healed, which is a great lesson about consent on the one hand. But also, it's that man was appointed for that part of his life to be a person who was not able to walk. He had a different ability. And Jesus didn't automatically presume, oh, let me take away that appointment for you because it is much better to be this way. He asked that man, hey, is this what you want? Which he had reasons to think in the context of where he was and a bunch of other things in that story. But he asked him, and the man said yes, and he restored his use of his legs. So if we want to be proactive in understanding disability and proactive in our community of how we can love and bless the people in our community with different ability levels, let's be proactive about that now, not when it's trendy and not when we feel pressured to because something horrible has happened in the news. And I'd encourage you to go find disability educators and learn from them. There's a lot of them. We should support them and learn from them, right? Not by going to the disabled people in our lives and asking them to do the emotional labor of explaining to us what it's like to be disabled. That's not necessarily their job, right? Unless they've so chosen to be a disability educator. So I've put some links in the description to people who I've loved to learn from, and that's just a jumping off point, and I encourage you all to do the same. All right, that's the idea. One thing that we can take away from this passage, even if we're not disabled or if we're learning about our friends and community members who are disabled, is that we so often have the experience of counting ourselves out. For whatever reason, we love to say, I'm only one person. God couldn't possibly use me in this world of 7 billion. Or, I'm retired. People don't pay attention to older people. My use in the world has dwindled and I'm just here to support and cheer on the people who are really doing the work in the world. That's also ironic because the younger people tend to say, I'm only a young person. What am I supposed to be doing? I don't have any capital. Nobody listens to me. God can use all of us and we get to partner with him for the entirety of our lives. There's not a checkout point in our lives where we get to say, well, I'm not really important anymore. You are always essential. You are always part of God's family. You're always part of what he's doing in this world. He's the head of this family, and his family business is putting the world back together and restoring it to a place of well-being and healing and light and freedom and justice. And so you are always invited to be part of that. So also, maybe this week, examine the places in your life where you sense that you're counting yourself out, especially, right, if it has something to do with disability or your body, because that's what's in the text, saying, oh, I couldn't possibly do that because I have social anxiety. Maybe I'll get over that and be able to help later. No, you can help now. You can help now. That's what we can take away from this fun story in the Quran and in Islamic commentary. Moshe, whose name in that narrative is Musa, he's the most frequently referenced character in the Quran, by the way, if you're not aware of all the crossover there. In that story, he has his disability in his tongue because as a baby, he was playing on Pharaoh's lap and he pulled his beard and slapped him. And the Pharaoh was concerned that he was going to turn out to be the Messiah of the Israelite people that he had heard about. And so he set up this test and ended up burning Moshe with hot coals in his mouth. So that's interesting potential origin story from our Islamic community. All right, going forward here. haha, going. Because God says, after he says, is it not I, God? He says, now go, which he said already. This is, I think, the third time that he has said, now go, now walk. Walk this path I've put out before you. I will be with your mouth and I will teach you what to say. I love that because he's already told him what he's going to say, right? But he's encouraging him that this will be an ongoing conversation. The word teach can also be translated flow. It's from river imagery, which is lovely because teaching is not just telling information. It's saying there is an origin of this information. There's all these pools of ideas, and I'm going to stream it to you. I'm going to flow it to you in a way that makes sense, hopefully, one by one by one by one. And at the end of the river, there's another body of water. There's a destination we're going to, right? So we're flowing this information. And so often when we are following God and we are in line with our relationship with him, that is what it feels like. God doesn't necessarily show up and say, today at 9:05, when you're at work or when you're taking care of your baby at home, this is going to happen and I order you to do this. And then we say, okay, I've got it, and we go. No, it's in the moment. You sense a whisper or a nudge of what you ought to do or what you might do, and it flows to you, and you open your mouth and it flows out of your mouth. That's so often more of the experience. So I think it's fun that it's tucked into the word there. Okay, now Moshe says something a little bit difficult to parse. He says, and he said, send please by the hand that you will send. And so a lot of people take send please by the hand that you will send. They think that he's saying by a different hand, by any hand other than mine, which I get where they're guessing that contextually, right? Because he's about to offer a solution that makes it seem like maybe he's saying that. I see more send please by the hand that you will send as saying, okay, you're going to send whoever, fine, do what you're going to do. I guess I'll do it. That's the way that I would read that, but if you read it a different way, that's okay. And then we have something else difficult to parse, which is the fun part of dealing with a many thousand-year-old text, is it leaves these different puzzles for us to talk about. And if you have an addiction to certainty, it might bother you, but hopefully otherwise it's something that piques your interest. Okay, send please by the hand that you will send. And the anger of God was kindled in Moshe. So a lot of the time, which is a perfectly okay stance to take, the idea is taken that God is angry at Moshe. But most of the time that we talk about anger, it's the word al, which means over or upon, not in. And it says in Moshe there. So another way to think about that is perhaps that anger at God, there isn't a word for at, was in Moshe, as in Moshe is the one who is angry, because it doesn't say, and he, it doesn't say who the he is there. So it potentially reads, starting from the beginning of that verse, fine, send whoever it is you're going to send, and Moshe became angry at God. Right? That would also make sense contextually because he's finally run out of things that he's going to say. I, with my biases, am a little bit more comfortable saying that Moshe is the one who's angry than God, right? I don't like the idea of God getting PO'd. That's just who I am. But if you think that it says anger of God, that must mean that it is God's anger. That's fine. You can talk about it, come to discussion, you can parse it out. It's good stuff. Okay, so either way, somebody's angry in this narrative. I think it makes sense that it's Moshe. You can think that it's God. That's fine. So now God says, in response, either to Moshe's anger or to his send please by the hand that you will send, he says this, is there not Aharon, your brother, the Levi, the Levi, in Hebrew, it's not Levi, Levi. I know that speaking, he will speak also. That's that grammatical setup that we've seen. Seeing, I have seen. And now it's coming back. Speaking, he will speak also, right? He's not taking Moshe's speaking role out. He says he'll also speak. He'll also help you out. Look, behold just means look. It's just Christianese for look. He is coming out to call to you and see you and rejoice in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth. I will teach or flow to you what you shall do. He will speak for you to the people. He will be a mouth for you, and you will be as God for him. Okay, so here's the takeaway from this. There's a couple of things in there to unpack first, I guess. But so he says the Levi. That's interesting. A Levite, as we say in English, is a person with a very particular calling and role. And Moshe is also from that family. But God does not automatically call him a Levite. He calls his brother Aharon a Levite. It's fascinating, even though their grandfather was Levi. It means bound to something, right? It's a group of people who were bound to this particular calling, and yet Moshe's diverged. That can happen sometimes. All right, so he's going to show up. Moshe is still expected to speak, not just him, and yet as God chooses to speak to Moshe, Moshe will choose to speak to Aharon. Aharon, by the way, has some very mysterious meaning. It's probably Egyptian because it does not have any links to Hebrew or the other Semitic languages related to Hebrew. So that's fun. We have a person who's kind of embedded perhaps in Egyptian culture, and yet he still has this special calling. All right. Having a partner, by the way, is a great way to mitigate your weaknesses. Disability and those challenges or not, it's good to have a right hand. And later we'll see Miriam be the left hand going into a situation. In many of our culture's depictions of heroes, it's up to them and they're the one person who saves the world. But it's nice to have somebody else with other skills to admit, oh, I'm not so great at that. It would be great if you would help me with that. That's great. So that's one way you can look at this text. Another way you can look at this text is that if God is asking you to do something and you say no over and over and over and over again, God is persistent. God is faithful. God still loves you. But that might change, right? It's a relationship. And if every day your spouse is like, hey, I want to take you on a date. And you're like, I don't feel up to it. Hey, I want to take you on a date. I don't feel up to it. How about this kind of date? I don't feel up to it, right? Your spouse might change their terms a little bit. That might be a weight on the relationship. So here, after Moshe has said no, 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 God finally says, fine. So be aware of that in your own life. Is that what you want? Do you want God to be taking away part of your calling? Clearly that is what Moshe wanted, but sometimes we say no, 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 because we don't want to be outside of our comfort zone, and we do miss opportunities because of that. So be aware that even though God is infinitely patient, yet there's a paradox there, yet he'll listen to us and he'll believe us if we're constantly telling him no. All right, and the last thing that he says is take this branch in your hand, or rod or staff. It's not the word for staff, it's the word for branch, but people usually change it to rod. Take this branch in your hand, that with it you will do the signs. So we already talked about the potential origin story of this branch last week, right? It's potentially a magical stick from the Garden of Eden. That's fun. But what's really going on here culturally is up to the north, the empires of the north, and to the south in Egypt, the king, the great leader of his people, is always depicted as the great shepherd. And you probably already know this if you think about imagery of pharaohs and hieroglyphs that you've seen. One of the things they're holding is a staff, is this big crook, right? If not, Google it. It's pretty cool to see. And so all of these sections all through the Bible where we have Jesus as the good shepherd, where we have Moshe here being given his rod, his branch again. It's not just about being a shepherd, being a humble thing. It's also a cultural image for a humble servant king, right? So it's not, this kind of is a David and Goliath story, right? Of this prince who's run away and is a criminal coming back to court and having this big showdown with Pharaoh. But it's also with his staff saying, I'm the leader of this nation, you're the leader of your nation. So God is calling him to see himself that way, because he already had this staff, right? I mean, maybe he dropped it when he ran away, or he's not sure that it's going to turn into a snake again, so he's kind of set it on the ground. I can see that happening. So it's more likely a symbolic thing. Take this staff in your hand, take upon yourself this identity of leader that I'm calling you to be, and own it. Own that this is who you are. We are, especially if we're women, we are often encouraged to be self-effacing and disparaging. And so, oh, I'm just me, I'm just doing my best. Haha, I'm so happy that I was able to help. God says, no, own. This is the calling I have given you. This is who you are. Take this staff, own it. So wherever we are in the world, in our leadership positions, whether that's because of our age or because of your workplace or because of who you are in your family, own the leadership and authority that God has given you. And this is going to be a moment. Finally, Moshe does not argue with God. Finally, after this help has been given to him, there is a silent okay. I would, if this was cinematic, you might hear God say that and look at the staff on the ground, and that's when the strings would swell as he looks at it and then decides to pick it up and put it in his hand, taking up his mantle, as it were. Bum, bum, bum. So let's do that in our own lives. Let's take the time to look in our specific situation, how it is that we can partner with God in putting the world back together, because we do have specific callings, because we're specific people with specific abilities, and God made us in diverse ways, which is wonderful. And that calling might change over time. It's not that you have necessarily one for your whole life and it's static and never changes. It can change, but what is it that God's calling you to do in your life? What kind of person is he calling you to be? How is it that you have been uniquely set up to do that? And then don't count yourself out. Don't come up with reasons to stay inside your comfort zone and to just cheer on others or retweet or share what others are doing. Take that staff for yourself and say, no, this is me. This is who I am and what I'm doing in the world. And I promise you that God is coming up alongside you in that thinking and will continue to be with you and with your mouth, like he tells Moshe. And that's a whole experience in itself of wrestling with God and your relationship with him and trusting and leaning out. And if we just sit back in our armchair and watch other people do it, that's not real knowing. That's not an experiential knowing, and that's missing out on this one beautiful, precious life that we have. So let's take up our own staffs, no matter how God made us, or with the way that God made us, and go forth. I'll pray. God, I ask that you would help us to therefore walk. We have so many little obstacles that we set up, whether it's something that our teacher told us on a report card when we were little of, oh, I can't do that because of this, or something that the world tells us because of our gender or sexual orientation or any limitations. We have all sorts of reasons that it feels safer for us to stay in our bubble and not count ourselves as the protagonist in our own life or the protagonist in the world being put back together. So I ask that you would help us with the help of our community, slowly or all in a moment, God. Either way, it's fine with me. Help us dismantle those lies, those obstacles, those things that hold us back and cause us to miss out. Rather, come alongside us and help us to see us the way that you see us, counting us in. We're an integral part of bringing kingdom. We are integral to putting the world back together. We have a therefore walk over our own life. Help us to see ourselves that way. Help us to entrust, depend on you, but also know how to walk at the same time. Help us to be good allies to the disabled community and other marginalized communities around us. Help us how to know how to do that with wisdom, with grace, with love, not seeing them as another project, Lord, but help us to be real allies. Thank you that you give us aharons, and that you are patient with us and provide even when we say no. Help us this week to say yes. It might be the first time in a long time, but help us to show up when you come knocking and say yes, even if it's to the smallest little thing. Just hearing that you love us, help us say yes to that. And if it's bigger, help me say yes to tithing. Let us say yes to that. Help me say yes to loving my coworker. Help me say yes to loving people on social media. All of the above, Lord, we need you. And so we turn to you and trust that you will show up, because that's who you are. And we ask all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. All right. The PDF with the discussion questions, as always, link in description. We're hoping to put out a video about exactly what our financial needs are for the church and why we are asking for help and investment in this little church that we're putting together. And so you can also keep your eye out for that video. Hopefully it'll come out this week. But in the meantime, the link to tithing is either on our website or also link in the description. If you've never hung out with us before and you want to join discussion, maybe you really want to tell me what you think about the anchor section, or you want to process all of these questions in community, we'd love to have you send a form through on our website, and it'll send a little email to us, and we'll get back to you hopefully immediately about how you can join us over Zoom. Have a wonderful week, friends, and I'll see you at discussion or next week. Talk to you guys later. Bye.